Hi there, in this video we're going to be looking at this. This is the Lumix 100-300 f4 to f5.6 zoom lens. The version 1, we're going to be put it through its paces and see how it stacks up today in 2021. Join me. YouTube, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy with you with another video, and today we're going to be looking at this. This is the Lumix 100-300mm zoom lens, f4 to f5.6. This is the version 1, which has the Mega OIS, the Mega Image Stabilization on it, not the version 2 which has the Power OIS, but we'll come to that in a few moments. So join me as we go through it. Here it's mounted on my GX8, but most of the photographs have been taken in this has had the lens mounted on my G9. So I'll be showing you some of the photographs as we go through. We're going to have a quick look at the specs, but more importantly, we're going to see if this is good value today in 2021 as a used lens. So let's have a little look at what we've got. Well, let's pop it off the camera first of all, and we'll have a little look and see what we have on this. So, the lens itself, stick the lens back cover on. I don't like leaving covers off lenses, I don't know about you. Lovely little thing, plastic construction, but it's a good quality plastic. Couple of rubberized knurled rings, one for the focus at the front, a much larger one for the zoom, and you see it's an extending zoom. But luckily, you should be able to hopefully see it on there, as we extend, the lens doesn't rotate, so if you are using any filters or effects on the front of it, you're not going to have that change. And also it doesn't rotate when you're focusing either, which is absolutely superb. So it means you've got a nice stable platform if you're using any add-ons to the front of it. The good thing is as well, not only do you get the lens, but also you get a plastic lens hood, which is bayonet type, fits onto it. Great. It adds about probably about 3 centimeters onto the front length. But overall, doesn't bother too much because the front end with this on is light. It doesn't really add to any stability problems. Let's have a look and see what we've got in the way of specs on this lens before we go any further. And as I say, the lens itself is light. I've got the spec sheet down here. It weighs only 520 grams, half a kilo. So it's about 1.15 pounds. So again, if you've got this in your camera bag, I'm a great advocate, as you've seen on here, of taking out lightweight camera systems. And one of the beauty for me of this is, if you were to have the equivalent of this is equivalent on a full frame camera of a 200 to 600 zoom. Now if you had an equivalent on this, first of all, price wise, there's nothing which matches it price wise which gives you that sort of magnification. But if you were to match this insofar as abilities, there are a couple of lenses. Sigma has one out, for instance, but you'll find it's about 3 times as long and probably about 4 times the weight. So we've got some serious savings on that. We'll come back to the performance of the lens shortly, but I'm going to go through some of the specs. Now, as you know, I'm not a great one for doing specs, but specifications, quite a few you do like this on here, so I'm going to go through the specs. Why I'm not a great one for specs is because what's written down on the page quite often doesn't relate into what's a usable lens in the field. It's got a diameter of 74mm, length is 126mm, and that's with it before it's expanded out. Filter thread on the front is a nice 67. So if you come from the APS-C or the full frame sort of cameras, you probably have the ability to get lots and lots of stuff for 67mm screw filters on the front. It's a very, very common size and really usable on that. As I said, it doesn't have rotation on the focusing, which again is great. The lens hood is supplied, but you'll find that there's no collar on this. So if you're used to the idea of having a collar for the tripod mount on the lens, you're missing out on it. But fortunately, as I say, it's a fairly light lens. It's a really good usable lens. So even with something like the GX8 that I had it on before, sticking it on a tripod, it's not too front heavy. So most tripods will quite happily take the strain on this without putting any real strain on the camera body itself. It does have the ability for full-time manual. So if you switch your camera on the manual on the front, you can use the manual focus ring quite happily. It doesn't have a distance scale, doesn't have a focusing scale, depth of field scale I should say. But generally, usable sort of lens. As I say, 100 to 300mm range on it, so it's given the equivalent of a full frame 200 to 600, and that's amazing. That really is awesome. It has a usable range of f4 to f5.6, so it's not a fixed focus on that throughout the range. When you get up to probably about 150 to 200mm. You're starting to get up towards about the f5, but it's fairly small. It's only a small part of a stop, so it's not a full stop distance between the two. Maximum aperture on this is f22, so you can really stop this down. It has, on this one, it has 17 elements in 12 groups, so it does have a lot of lenses in it. But generally I find it very, very well controlled. And of course the thing is that when you are using a zoom lens, you're covering a multitude of different focal lengths and trying to be everything at every length in between its full range. So really you need the ability lens-wise to be able to cope with those different situations. It has one ED glass element in it, which is a coated lens on there. Minimum focus on this isn't particularly close, it's 1.5 meters. Now again, you're talking about an equivalent of a 200 to a 600mm lens, so 1.5 meters is actually really close on that. That's about just short of 60 inches, about 59.5 inches on that. The maximum magnification on this is 0.21 times zoom. As I say, it does have autofocus, and it's quite a good sharp autofocus on this. So in spec wise, it covers most of the bases. And it's usable on that. So we've covered the specs. Let's go and have a look and see what the equivalents are, and we'll see why I chose this lens over some of the others out there. This is the Mark 1 version of this 100 to 300 lens. There's a Mark 2, and they're very easy to see that the markings on the Lumix lenses between the Mark 1 and Mark 2 has changed noticeably, mainly to do with the pattern around there, this sort of grey colour, and the sort of goldy coloured text font on there. Some lenses have a big difference, some have less. Now the big difference between this one and the replacement for it is that this uses the Mega optical image stabilization, the Mega OIS. The Mark II has the Power OIS, and that has a significant difference for me as a G9 user, because the Mega OIS does not talk properly through the camera to integrate itself into the camera's IBIS. The Power OIS on the Mark II does. So if it's important to you to have the two working with each other, then really you need to go for the Mark II. Now there's three lenses that really we'll look at in this range from the Lumix side. I'm not touching the Olympus because they're all Olympus equivalents, and I'm not doing a comparison on those on this. I haven't had the opportunity to do a comparison, so I'm not even going down that route. But there is the Mark 1 100 to 300 f4 to 5.6. There is the Mark II, which I've just mentioned, but there's also a lot more expensive Leica, Lumix Leica based 100 to 400, which is a superb lens. I've used it before. It really does give some stunning results. So if that's the case, why have I chosen to purchase the Mark 1 over the Mark II or the Lumix? Well, it's very, very simple. If you look on some of the second-hand sites in the UK, the Mark 1 is going for around about the £300. Now, this is a lens I don't use often. I will use it occasionally, and it's a really good one to keep in the camera bag for when you want that occasion. I'll use it occasionally if I'm shooting air shows and things like that, or low-flying aircraft. I've used it once or twice when I've been doing some of the reviews on the cameras, when I've been doing some wildlife photography, but it's not my normal shooting style. So this is very much one of those nice to have in the bag, but I don't use it a lot. For £300, this is absolutely great. To go for the version 2, which optically doesn't give me really any difference at all that I've been able to discern, except, as I say, for the image stabilization working with the camera. Now, if you're going to be going for that, you're talking about another £100 on top. So you're talking about £400 on average second-hand for a good quality lens. Obviously prices will vary depending on the quality of the lens and where you get it from. But from some of the reputable used retailers such as my local camera store, Wilkinson's, or from MPB, that's the sort of price that you're probably going to be paying for them. In comparison, the 100 to 400, you're talking about £800 to £900 on the used market for one of those. Now it is a superb lens, but if this isn't the lens you're using constantly, that's a big, big price difference. And for me, it's not something I'm willing to spend. In the comparison of those, for me, it had to be the Mark 1. It was just, from a cost effectiveness point of view, it was just superb. So let's go and have a look and see just what sort of images that it produces. And I'll be putting some photos up, as I have been already, throughout this. Now, I took the lens up to Torque and Ton from a normal thing of taking photos of ducks. It seems an awful lot of people, actually, when they're reviewing this lens, do take photographs of ducks for some reason, but it's probably just that they're easy and on the place to get hold of. Generally, I found the lens to have a really good even sharpness across its whole range, and that didn't really matter too much what f-stop you had it on. It does soften up a little bit as you get to the extremes, as most lenses do. So if you're getting down to the f4 or the f5.6 when you go to fully zoomed in, you do get a bit of a softness. But if you get this up to about f6.3 or f7.1 or f8, you're really getting a wonderful sharp image out of it. Once you start getting up towards the higher f16s, f22, again you start getting a softening coming in, you get a few other little problems associated. But none of these are particularly bad problems, and almost everything that I get on this can be taken out in post-production and sharpened up with some of the image processing tools available. One of the things I did notice though when you've got it wide open is you do get a slight vignette of about a stop to a stop and a half in the corners compared to the centre. Now again, that can be easily taken up just with the vignetting tool in something such as Lightroom or the standard sort of editing softwares. It's not a big problem. And to be honest, most of the time when you're doing something with this lens, you tend to be focusing on something in the center. It really is one of those sort of lenses that you're looking at something specific rather than a nice general shot. So again, although there is a softening and a darkening in the corners when it's fully opened, it really doesn't bother me too much. One of the things that I did notice on this though was the control of lens flare. Even without the lens hood on, I found that lens flare was really well controlled, and often on a lens of this length that's not the case. I've had some real problems with long lenses in the past, and especially when you get into the ciliac lengths. As I say, this comes to about a 600 if it was on full frame. That's usually given me some big problems in the past with lens flare. Stick the lens hood on, and unless you're shooting at the direct sunlight or having to bounce off something in front of you, you really don't have much in the way of problems on the lens at all. It's a very, very easy to use lens and controllable in that way. Where I did find a problem though was a little bit of chromatic aberration when you get onto some of the straight edges with a backlight on it. You can just get a slight fringing on it. You get the purple-green split somewhat. But again, the camera takes an awful lot of that out. If you're using it on the Lumix cameras, the Lumix cameras really do take an awful lot of that out immediately insofar as the lens corrections. And if you do have some elements of that left over, again, most editing software will take that out in very, very easy time. But again on this, none of it was particularly bad. It wasn't something which was going to cause great issues. It was very well controlled, and when you did have it, on the few exceptions where you did have it, because most of the time I didn't notice it, but where you did, generally it was very, very easy to control and very easy to get rid of in post. Now, one of the beauties of having a lens like this, of course, is the fact that it works in a different way. It gives you a different sort of image to the wide angle or the other mid-range lenses. And one of the things I hear an awful lot about Micro Four Thirds is, well, you can't get a shallow depth of field. Well, look at some of the photographs I'm putting up here. The depth of field, because it's a long lens and because of the way that you have to frame a subject and the distance you are, remember that there's three main things which alter depth of field. One is your aperture, two is your distance, and three is the depth of field of the lens itself, which it's able to get. And those are the main sort of characteristics which give you that shallow depth of field. And to me, this really is, it gives you the ability to get some fantastic shallow depth of field if that's your thing. Generally for me it's not. Although we talk about a shallow depth of field as being desirable, I'm more into the idea that it's the ability to have that rather than the fact that it gives you it every time. It gives me the choice that if I want to have a shallow depth of field, then I can, and if I don't want to, then it gives me lots of ability to get a very wide depth of field. And again, going down to f22 on this gives that ability for a very wide depth of field. It's really useful on that, very, very comfortable. One of the things that a long lens also does, though, is give a lot of compression. And you'll see in some of these shots, especially the ones with the cars on the motorway, and there's a particular one which I think I'll bring up now if I can, where we've got the Lightning and the Phantom at the Air Museum. Now, both of these aircraft are about 40 to 50 feet long. So when you consider that from the back of the Lightning to the front of the Phantom, if they were touching each other, would be about 80 to 120 feet, but also there's actually a big distance between them. So that actually, we're talking probably about 120, 150 feet from the tail of the Lightning, the silver one at the back, to the front of the Phantom, the camouflaged one. And what we have on this is it really flattens a whole lot down. It looks as if there's almost no distance whatsoever between them. And by using a fairly open aperture, It's given me the ability. I had to pump the ISO up on this one, so I think this is about ISO 1600. But by pumping the ISO up and closing the aperture really low down to about f16, f22, I think this was f22. Yes, it was f22. You've got that ability to get such a wonderful compression on there. If we look at the photographs of the cars on the motorway, not the most inspiring photographs, I must hasten to add, but they do for this presentation. We've probably got somewhere between quarter and half a mile between the back of the motorway and the front point in view, and yet the cars seem to all just be on a flat plane in there. This is a characteristic of long focal length lenses, gives you that compression of distance, and because again having the ability to have a fairly long depth of field on that gives a very different image to if we'd taken this on a wide angle lens or on a medium sort of lens. If you'd done it on either of those, you would have had cars disappearing into the background being tiny and the ones up front being extremely large in comparison. On these, the difference in size, even quarter of a mile, half a mile away, is a lot less. And this is a particular style. If you want that style, you need a long lens, and this lens is ideal for that. So in conclusion, what do we think of this lens? Well, as I say, I like it. I've had the lens a little while now. I've used it not extensively because, as I say, it's not a lens that I use every day, but it's one of those lenses which I keep in my camera bag, and when I need that super long shot, it's there for me. Would I recommend it? Well, yes, I would, because it's been a great lens for me. As I say, the Mark II is available, and if you're relying on using getting the best out of your image stabilization, that is the better one to go for of the 100 to 300. But to be honest, I've handheld this down to, well, on the 300mm, which is equivalent to a 600 full frame. I've managed to handhold this down to about the 15th of a second and get some really, really useful results without using a tripod or a monopod. Stick it onto a tripod or a monopod and the world's your oyster. You can take what you like on it. But obviously then you've got problems with moving objects. So for £300 second hand, I think this is an absolute steal. It's the sort of thing that you could pay tens of thousands of pounds for if you were in one of the larger formats. And because it's Micro Four Thirds, it's nice and easy. Get it, buy it, stick it in your bag. They are quite plentiful as well, so there's quite a few on the market. I think the problem is that an awful lot of people buy them with big intentions that they can use, they can get some fantastic long shots. But we don't use it that often insofar as a normal day-to-day lens. And I think some people tire of it somewhat. And it is an important thing. So if you are considering a lens of this length, it's probably worth seeing if you can hire one first or borrow one and just see how useful it is to you. But if it is a useful lens, then get it. And as I say, if you can afford it, it's one of those lenses is worth having in your camera bag just to get that one-off shot which you might not get otherwise. My name is Brian James. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please leave some comments below, hit the subscribe button and the bell, and don't forget on the bell to hit notify all, otherwise you won't get some of the notifications through. Give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, because that really helps YouTube to spread the algorithm so that they can show these videos to more and more people. And if you get the chance to give me a bit of support on this, there's a little PayPal link below to buy me a coffee. Really appreciate it if you can. That helps the channel carry on going. But whatever it is, whichever lens you use, and whether it's a short one or a long one, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds guy saying, keep on taking your camera out, keep on taking photographs, and keep on enjoying your photography. See you next time. Bye-bye.